Hi there, my name is Laura Carno, and I run Faster Colorado. In Colorado, we were the first state to fully take Faster Saves Lives from Ohio. A group of folks from Ohio came out in 2017. We are now, I would like to say, completing our third training season, but we actually had to add a Thanksgiving week class just due to demand in Colorado. I'm also a visiting fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. They approached me in January and asked me to come on board to do blogging, op-eds, and media for be able to talk about gun rights. So IWF.org if you want to take a look at the great work that they do there. So I'm going to talk briefly about what is new in the discussions about school massacres, because the language keeps changing. So three things I'm going to talk about briefly. One is understanding motives. It's not what you think. The second is talking about school resource officers versus armed staff. And three, what are the new frontiers? So first of all, will understanding the motive of the killer, of the school killer, you can extend this to other non-school massacres as well, will that stop them? And I did a whole bunch of research on this that was pretty fascinating. Wrote an article called Understanding Motives Will Not Stop Mass Killings. And here's why. The FBI in 2018 wrote a report that said, actually, it's not the motive that matters, it's the pre-killing signs. And somebody earlier talked about the Secret Service report. There are some very similar findings. It's the pre-attack behaviors that are far more significant and predictive than actual motive. And when you think about the Parkland killer, it doesn't matter what his motive was. You can call it whatever you want. The pre-attack behaviors were very consistent. Something like 30-some times in 7 years, police went out to his house. So there's a whole lot behind that. But you also have to think about like the El Paso killer, and that wasn't a school, but he had a motive. He claimed a motive of white supremacy. So what happens after that is then people say, well, we have to go after white supremacists. Well, that's actually, as horrifying as white supremacy is, that's actually not the problem. The background is that there's been a bunch of research done called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. There's a great website called ACEs Too High, and it talks about, it takes all of these mass killers and says what's consistent about them. It's not their motive. It's all of these pre-attack behaviors and different things that happen to them in their childhood. So if schools want to do something about changing this behavior, take a look at these kids with high ACEs scores. They've experienced abuse in the home, watched their mother be abused, those kinds of things, and figure out some remediation for those kids if you really want to do something to stop it. As Esther said earlier, get Andrew Pollack's book, Why Meadow Died. That talks a lot about what goes on in these schools. And as a parent and grandparent, think about it this way. Stagg said, run for school board, absolutely. If you're not that person, this is your kid, your grandkid. You are hiring a school, so to speak, hiring a school to educate your kid. You expect your kids to be returned alive every day, so have those conversations with your school. Second, school resource officers versus armed staff. We hear over and over, we'd rather have school resource officers. Okay, and by the way, we're for all of the above. We like school resource officers and armed staff. Set that aside for a second. School resource officers are fully sworn police or sheriff's deputies in your school. And that's great. They can deal with a whole lot of different things. But if there is going to be an active killer, and there have been active killers in schools with school resource officers, they know who that person is, and they are likely going to start their crime as far away as possible from that school resource officer. Even if you have SROs, parents and grandparents, do not let your school board or superintendent say it's all good because we have SROs. We still need, call it undercover, concealed carry armed staff on campus. And don't forget that John Lott's new research shows that no school with armed staff, and this is concealed carry armed staff, has ever had a school shooting. Last is the near frontier of armed staff, and that's churches and homeschoolers. Churches have schools. Schools have churches. They're very intermingled now. Church violence, there's now more church violence than school violence, even though we hear about schools more. We see a lot of crossover. There's probably lots of folks in this room who are on their church's armed security team. Check out an organization called FBSN, Faith-Based Security Network, fbsnamerica.com. They do for churches what Faster is doing for schools. But homeschoolers not only, by the way, a fierce group of moms, in general moms, a fierce group of defenders. They're not only teaching their kids in school, but once a week they go to these co-ops. And guess what? There's a couple of hundred kids in some kind of a room, not a traditional schoolroom sometimes, who are equally vulnerable. So think about that even for homeschooling. So your call to action: know what's going on in your church, know what's going on in your school, and I'm not getting paid to say this, but get Andrew Pollack's book, and as Esther said earlier, buy one for everyone, because parents and grandparents need to know what's going on in their schools, and it's really scary. The people who could turn into school killers need to be stopped. So thank you very much for having me again.